The bell above the door rang, and Clara Vaughn's breath stopped dead in her chest. 20 years. 20 years of silence, of waiting, of finally convincing herself she was done waiting. And now he was standing in the doorway of her father's store, like time had folded in half and spat him out whole. Taller, harder, dust on his collar and something ancient behind his eyes. He looked right at her and said it like no time had passed at all. "I came back, Clara, just like I promised." Her hand tightened around the counter until her knuckles went white. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Subscribe to this channel, follow along until the very last word, and drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning had been perfectly ordinary, which was the cruelest thing about it. Clara Vaughn had woken before the sun the way she always did, brewed coffee the way her mother had taught her, strong enough to stand a spoon in, and walked the 3 blocks from her house to Vaughn's general store, the way she had done for the better part of her adult life. She unlocked the front door. She counted the register. She restocked the shelf near the window, where the canned goods kept getting knocked crooked by customers who never put anything back right. She was 30 years old. She had a routine. She had a life built on the solid, dependable weight of small tasks done faithfully, and she had made her peace with that. More or less, on most days. That particular afternoon, she had been arguing gently with herself about whether to reorder the brown sugar or wait until the next delivery when the bell above the door rang. She didn't look up immediately. That was the thing she kept coming back to later in the long, sleepless hours. She almost didn't look up. She almost just called out, "Be right with you," the way she did 100 times a day. But something made her raise her eyes, and then the world went sideways. He was tall, taller than she remembered, though the boy she remembered had still been growing. His hat was pushed back from his forehead, and 20 years of hard sun had done what hard sun always does to a face deepened. It carved. It left no room for anything soft or unnecessary. His clothes were dusty. His jaw was set. And his eyes, those gray eyes she had spent years trying to forget, were fixed on her with the kind of certainty that only comes from a man who has been heading somewhere for a very long time and has finally arrived. "I came back, Clara," Ethan Ryder said. "Just like I promised." She said nothing. Her hand found the edge of the counter and held on. "Clara." "I heard you." Her voice came out level. That surprised her. "I just don't know what you expect me to say to that." He took one step inside and the bell swung once more above him like a punctuation mark. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just needed you to know." "You needed me to know." She set down the pencil she'd been holding. She hadn't even realized she was still holding it. 20 years, Ethan. Not a letter, not a telegram, not one single word. She looked at him. Really looked, making herself do it the way you make yourself look at something that might hurt. "And now you walk in here and say those 4 words like they're supposed to fix all of that." "No." His voice was quiet and deliberate. "They're not supposed to fix anything. I just kept my word. That's all." Guide. The silence between them stretched long enough to become its own kind of conversation. Old Mr. Henley, who had been browsing the seed display near the back wall, glanced over his shoulder, sensed something electric in the air between the 2 people at the front of the store, and quietly set down his packet of radish seeds and slipped out through the back. Clara was grateful for that at least. "You look well?" Ethan said, because the silence had to break somewhere. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk to me like we're strangers who just met at a church social." She came around the counter then, because standing behind it suddenly felt like hiding. She stopped a few feet in front of him. Up close, she could see the years more clearly, a scar along his jawline. She didn't know the story of a stiffness in the way he held his left shoulder, a heaviness around his eyes that had nothing to do with road dust. "You left," she said. "You were 15 years old, and you left, and you promised you'd come back, and you didn't. I waited, Ethan. I was 10 years old, and I waited for you. And then I was 15, and I waited, and then I stopped waiting because I had to. Because you weren't coming." She held his gaze. "So don't tell me you came back just like you promised, because a promise has a clock on it, and yours ran out a long time ago." His jaw moved. Something in his expression shifted, not breaking exactly, but bending. "You're right," he said. "You're completely right. And I'm not here to argue that." "Then why are you here?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I built something," he said. "It took me a long time, longer than I planned. But I built it, and when I was done, there was only one place left to go." She stared at him. "You built something." "A ranch, up in Montana. 40 acres of good house cattle that'll carry a man through lean years and fat ones both." A pause. "I built it for you, Clara. I built the whole thing for you. And then I came to tell you so." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. She heard them. She understood them. And she felt beneath the shock and the anger and the 20 years of carefully maintained not caring something stir in her chest that she did not welcome and could not quite name. "You should leave," she said. "All right." He didn't move. "Ethan?" "I'll leave." He reached inside his coat and set something on the counter beside him, a small folded piece of paper. "But I'm staying in town a few days, over at Harlan's boarding house. When you're ready to talk, not argue, just talk, you know where to find me." He picked up his hat from where he'd been holding it at his side, turned it once in his hands, and put it back on his head. "It's good to see you, Clara. Even like this." He walked out. The bell rang above the door, and Clara stood in the middle of the store for a long time before she remembered how to breathe. She didn't open the paper until after she'd closed up for the night. She almost didn't open it at all. She set it on her kitchen table and walked away from it, made dinner, washed the dishes, sat in the chair by the window with a book she didn't read, and then somewhere in the hour when pretending became too much work, she went back to the table and unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a deed. Or rather, a partial copy of one, just the top portion with his name on it, and an address in Shelby County, Montana, and 42 acres of land listed as property owned free and clear. And in the margin in handwriting, she still recognized after 2 decades 4 words. "It's real. Come see." She folded it back up. She set it back on the table. She told herself it meant nothing. And then she sat there at her kitchen table in the dark of Copper Ridge, Arizona, and cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was 10 years old. Word travels fast in a small town. By the following morning, half of Copper Ridge had heard that a stranger had come into Vaughn's general store, and that Clara Vaughn had gone pale as bleached cotton, and hadn't said 2 words to anyone for the rest of the afternoon. By noon, someone had connected the stranger to the name Ryder, and by supper time, the older residents, those who'd been around long enough to remember the Ryder family, had filled in the rest. Ethan Ryder, James Ryder's boy, grew up out on the east edge of town before the family packed up and moved on when the boy was 15. Always quiet, smart people said, a little solitary. Had been close at one point with little Clara Vaughn, who'd been the schoolteacher's daughter back then. By the following morning, opinions had formed. Martha Oakes, who ran the fabric shop next door to the general store, was the first one through the door. "So," she said, setting her basket on the counter with the practiced authority of a woman who has spent 60 years being right about things. "Ethan Ryder." "Good morning, Martha. Is it true he walked in here and said he came back for you?" Clara moved a bolt of twine from one shelf to another for no particular reason. "He said he came back. He didn't say it wasn't." She stopped. "It's complicated." "Oh, honey." Martha settled her considerable weight onto the stool near the counter. "It's only complicated because you're letting it be. The man's been gone 20 years. You don't owe him a thing." "I know that. But..." Clara looked at her. But nothing, Martha. Martha looked back at her in the particular way of women who have seen too much of life to be fooled by calm faces. You opened the paper he left you. It wasn't a question. Clara's jaw tightened. How do you know about the paper? I don't know anything about any paper. I know your face. Martha reached over and patted her hand once firmly, the way you calm a spooked horse. Be careful, Clara. That's all I'm saying. Men who disappear and come back with explanations are still men who disappeared. Ethan, for his part, did not push. He stayed at Harlan's boarding house as he'd said he would. He ate his meals at the counter of the diner on 2nd Street. He was polite, direct, and said nothing about his history in town to anyone who didn't already know it. When a fence post came loose at the edge of the Whitmore property, and old Cal Whitmore couldn't manage it alone, Ethan showed up with a post-hole digger and fixed it without being asked and refused the $1. Cal tried to press into his hand. Word of that kind of thing gets around, said Tom Reeves, who ran the hardware store and had his ear to every conversation in Copper Ridge to Clara on Thursday morning. I'm sure it does, Clara said. He fixed the Whitmore fence, helped Della Marsh carry her groceries when she twisted her knee, spent 3 hours yesterday helping young Pete Calloway track down a missing calf. Tom leaned on the counter. Whatever you think about him, he's not sitting idle. He's building goodwill, Clara said. That's a different thing from being a good man. Tom raised his eyebrows. Maybe? Or maybe he's just being decent because decent's what he is. He picked up his nails and his receipt. Not my business either way. Just thought you ought to know. She ran into him herself on Friday at the end of the afternoon on the road past the old oak tree on the north side of town. She hadn't planned it. She'd gone that way because she always went that way when she needed to think had been going that way since she was a child. The old oak was enormous, wider around than 2 men with linked hands could encircle, and it stood at the crest of a small rise that gave a long view west over the desert floor. She'd done her best thinking there for 30 years. The fact that it was also the place where she and Ethan Ryder had spent most of their childhood afternoons was something she'd learned to live with. He was already there when she arrived. She stopped dead on the path. He turned. He must have heard her footsteps, and for a second, neither of them moved. I'm not following you, he said quickly. I've been coming here every evening. I didn't know you still... I've been coming here my whole life, she said. This is my tree. I know. A beat. It's still mine too. A little. She stood there. She had 2 choices: turn around and go back the way she came, which would feel like losing something, or continue forward, which felt like something else she hadn't quite named yet. She continued forward. She stood at the base of the oak and looked west the way she always did. Ethan sat on the raised root beside her, the way he always had, like no time at all had passed, and also like 1,000 years had passed both at once. Why Montana? She asked. She wasn't sure why she asked it. Maybe because it was easier than the questions she actually wanted answers to. I went up there when I was 19, he said. Hired on at a cattle operation north of Shelby. Worked for a man named Devereaux for 6 years, hardest years of my life, and the best education I ever got. Saved every dollar I didn't need to survive. Bought a parcel when he retired, and sold off some of his land. A pause. Good soil. Hard winters, but good soil. Cattle thrive. You make it sound simple. It wasn't simple. His voice didn't change, but something underneath it did. There were years I wasn't sure I was going to make it. Years I worked from dark to dark and fell into a bunk and lay there wondering if I was building something real or just telling myself a story. He was quiet for a moment. But I kept at it. Why? She looked at him sideways. Why not just stay wherever you were? Why not build a life there? Find a woman there? Forget about the promise you made to a 10-year-old girl in a town you'd already left. He looked at her steadily. Because I didn't want to. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. He held her gaze. You can want something for 20 years, Clara. It's not impossible. I know people think it is. I know it sounds like something out of a dime novel, but it's not impossible. It's just rare. She looked away first. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of copper and rust. She thought about the deed in her kitchen drawer. She thought about what Martha Oakes had said. She thought about a 15-year-old boy on the back of a wagon turning to look at her over his shoulder saying, "I'll come back for you," and her 10-year-old self, believing him with a completeness that had taken years to undo. "You hurt me," she said, not angrily, just plainly the way you state a fact. "I want you to know that, not as an accusation, just as the truth." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I know I did. I was a child and I believed you completely and you didn't come." "No," he said, "I didn't. And you're not going to explain why." "I'll explain everything if you want. Every year, every reason, every choice I made. I'll sit here and tell you all of it for as long as it takes." He paused. "But I didn't come back to justify myself. I came back because I made a promise and I intend to keep it. The explanation is separate from that." She turned to look at him fully, then really look the way she'd stopped herself from doing when he first walked into the store. The scar on his jaw, the gray eyes that had always been older than the rest of him. The way he sat still deliberate like a man who had learned that most problems could wait if you were patient enough to let them. She didn't know what she felt. She didn't know yet what she was going to do, but she stayed. They sat together at the foot of the old oak tree as the sun went all the way down, not talking much, just breathing the same air the way they had done 1,000 times when they were children, and in the settling dark of the Arizona desert in the town where she had built her careful and dutiful life, something shifted in Clara Vaughn. Not toward him, not yet, but away from the idea that she was done. She didn't know yet that she was not the only one watching Ethan Ryder's return. On the far side of the darkening street, a man stood at the window of the sheriff's office, with his arms crossed, and his expression professionally neutral, and his eyes fixed on the road that led north toward the old oak tree. Sheriff Marcus Hale had been in Copper Ridge for 11 years. He knew this town the way a doctor knows a body, every weakness, every old wound, every place where the surface looked fine, but the trouble ran deep underneath. He'd kept the peace through drought and through range disputes and through the slow economic dry rot that had taken the life out of 3 businesses on Main Street over the past decade. He knew how to recognize a disruption before it became a crisis. Ethan Ryder had been in town 4 days. In 4 days he had been helpful, quiet, and relentlessly decent. He had given Marcus no reason at all for concern, which was in Marcus Hale's long experience, occasionally the most concerning thing of all. He watched the empty road for a long moment. Then he turned from the window, went back to his desk, sat down and wrote a letter. The letter was addressed to the sheriff's office in Shelby County, Montana. Its subject was simple: Ethan Ryder. History and standing. He folded it. He sealed it. He set it in the outgoing mail tray. And he went back to watching. That night, Clara took the deed out of her kitchen drawer again. She set it on the table in the lamplight and looked at it for a long time. 42 acres, Shelby County, Montana, owned free and clear. His name in official ink, a real thing, a built thing. It's real. Come see. She put it away again. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of Copper Ridge settling into its nighttime quiet. A dog somewhere, the creak of old wood in the walls, the distant murmur of wind across flat desert land. And she thought about what it means when a person keeps a promise. Not perfectly, not quickly, but in the end. She thought about the gap between what she'd told herself she believed and what she might in fact actually believe. And she thought about the way he'd said, "I came back, Clara," not defensive, not eager, not performing, just certain. The certainty of a man who had done a thing and was prepared to stand behind it. She didn't sleep easily, but somewhere deep in the night, something that had been locked shut inside her for a very long time turned over once in its housing like a key in a rusted lock, and she wasn't sure yet whether it would open or not. She only knew it had moved, and that was something she hadn't expected at all. The lock had moved. That was the thing Clara couldn't stop thinking about. Not opened, not broken. Just moved, shifted one small degree in the dark of a sleepless night, and now everything she'd built her certainty on felt slightly off-level, the way a table feels when one leg is shorter than the rest. You can set things on it. You can eat at it every day. But you always know. She was behind the counter on Saturday morning when her father came in. Robert Vaughn was 63 and walked with a cane now had for the past 2 years, since his hip started giving him trouble. But he moved through the store with the authority of a man who had built the place board by board and wasn't about to let a bad joint diminish that. He came in 3 mornings a week, checked the inventory ledger, argued gently with Clara about prices, and drank 1 cup of coffee at the back table before going home to rest. It was their routine. It was comfortable. It was one of the things Clara depended on. He set his cane against the counter and looked at her. "You've got something on your mind," he said. "Good morning to you too, Papa." "Don't good morning me. You've got that look your mother used to get when she was chewing on a problem and didn't want to admit it." He settled himself onto the stool. "Ethan Ryder came to see me yesterday." Clara's hands stopped moving on the ledger page. "He, what?" "Came to the house, knocked on the door like a civilized person, took his hat off when I answered." Robert wrapped both hands around the coffee mug Clara poured without being asked. He was respectful, direct, said he was sorry for any disruption his return had caused, said he had no intention of making things difficult for you, and said he wanted me to know his intentions were honorable. He said that, honorable. Those were his exact words. Her father studied her face. "I told him that was a fine speech, and that what mattered wasn't what he intended, but what he'd done. And what he'd done was leave my daughter waiting for 20 years. What did he say? He said, 'Yes, sir, you're right, and I'm not here to argue otherwise.'" Robert was quiet for a moment. "And then I asked him where he'd been and what he'd been doing, and he told me. All of it. Took about an hour." Clara looked up. "An hour." "He's a thorough man." Her father turned the coffee mug in his hands. "I'm not going to tell you what to feel about him, Clara. That's your business. But I'll tell you this, a man who comes to the father before he goes to the daughter, and who sits and answers hard questions without flinching or making excuses, is a man I can at least take seriously." "Nay." He paused. "I'm not saying trust him. I'm saying he earned the right to be listened to. There's a difference." Clara looked at her father for a long moment, at the careful neutrality he was working so hard to maintain, at the something underneath it that he was working equally hard to keep from showing. "You liked him," she said. Robert Vaughn picked up his cane. "I think that is absolutely none of your business," he said, and walked to the back table with the particular dignity of a man who has just said exactly as much as he intended to say. She found out about Marcus Hale's letter from Tom Reeves because in Copper Ridge there was no such thing as a truly private piece of correspondence, especially not one sent from the sheriff's office. "He wrote to Shelby County," Tom said, leaning on the counter with the look of a man delivering news he finds simultaneously interesting and uncomfortable. "Asked about Ryder's history, past troubles, standing in the community, whether there were any warrants or complaints." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "When?" 4 days ago, day after Ryder arrived. Tom rubbed the back of his neck. "Clara, I'm not saying Marcus is wrong to be careful. That's his job. But I thought you should know." "Has he gotten a reply?" "Don't know. Maybe. Maybe not yet." A pause. Marcus has always been, he's always kept a close eye on you. You know that. She knew that. Everyone in Copper Ridge knew that. Marcus Hale had made no secret of his regard for Clara Vaughn, had been making no secret of it for the better part of 5 years. He'd never pressed, never been anything but respectful, and she'd never encouraged him, and never quite discouraged him either, because he was a good man, and she hadn't trusted herself to know what she wanted. That ambiguity had suited them both in a careful, unspoken way. It did not feel ambiguous anymore. She thanked Tom and moved through the rest of the morning on automatic, the cold thing in her stomach not warming. Marcus came in at noon. He came in the way he always did, unhurried, comfortable in his own authority. The kind of man whose presence in a room reorganizes it slightly without him having to say a word. He bought a tin of tobacco he probably didn't need and set it on the counter and looked at her with those steady, pale eyes. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "I'm always fine." "That's what you always say." He didn't push it. "I want you to know that I'm keeping an eye on things. On him. Until I know more about who he is and what he's really here for. He's here because he came back. He told me that himself. People say things." Marcus picked up the tobacco tin and turned it in his hands. "A man shows up out of nowhere after 20 years, Clara, with a story about a ranch and a promise. That's a good story. Doesn't mean it's the whole story. Did you get a reply from Shelby County?" A slight pause, almost undetectable. "Not yet, but you're waiting for one." He met her eyes. "Yes." She held his gaze. "I appreciate that you want to protect me, Marcus. I do. But what you're doing, going behind his back, writing letters before you've spoken to him once, that's not protecting me. That's something else." His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I'm doing my job. Your job is this town's safety, not my personal decisions." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know you, Clara. I know how you are about loyalty, about keeping your word. And I'm worried that a man who knew exactly which buttons to push when you were 10 years old still knows where they are." He put the tin down on the counter. "That's all I'm saying." He left. And Clara stood in the store and thought about loyalty and buttons and the particular way Marcus Hale had just looked at her like a man who had made a calculation and wasn't sure yet whether it was going to pay off. She went to the boarding house that evening. She didn't plan it exactly. She walked out of the store at closing, turned left instead of right, and was standing in front of Harlan's front porch before she'd consciously decided to go there. Ethan was on the porch steps cleaning dust off his boots, and he saw her coming and went still. "You went to see my father," she said. "I did." "Without telling me." "He's your father," Ethan said simply. "I wasn't going to be in this town and not go see him. Whatever happens between you and me, he deserved that." She stopped at the foot of the steps. "You can't just do things like that. You can't just make decisions that involve my family without talking to me first." "You're right. I should have told you I was going." He looked at her directly. "But I wasn't going to not go. He's been taking care of you this whole time. That means something to me." "You haven't been here to watch him take care of me." "No," he agreed. "I haven't." The admission landed flat and honest, and she hated that it disarmed her. "He said you talked for an hour," she said. "He had questions. I answered them. All of them. Everyone he asked." A slight pause. "He's a good man, sharp. He doesn't miss much." "No," she said. "He doesn't." She looked at Ethan on those porch steps and tried to find the angle, the performance, the thing underneath the surface that Marcus was so sure had to be there. She looked hard, and she found a tired man, a patient man, a man who had driven a very long way and was sitting on a boarding house porch, cleaning his boots and answering whatever was thrown at him without complaint. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something you haven't already prepared." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've had 20 years to think about what you'd say when you got here. You've been rehearsing. I can tell. The words come out too smooth. She sat on the bottom step, not because she meant to, but because her legs decided it. Tell me something you didn't plan to say. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, I almost turned back, he said. 3 days out of Copper Ridge. I was riding south, and I passed through a town called Delano, and it looked enough like this place that I stopped, and I sat on my horse in the middle of that street, and I thought, she's moved on. It's been 20 years. She's built a life. She doesn't need me walking in and turning it upside down. A pause. I sat there for about 20 minutes. What made you keep going? The deed in my pocket, he said. I'd been carrying it for 2 months. Looking at her name in my head every time I thought about it. He looked down at the boot in his hands. I thought, at least let her know. At least let her see it's real. What she does with that is up to her. But she deserves to know it's real. She sat with that for a moment. Why didn't you write? She said. In 20 years. 1 letter, Ethan. 1 letter would have changed things, he said. I know it would have. Then why? He set the boot down, looked at her with those gray eyes that had always been too serious for a boy his age, and were now on this man's face, simply the face of someone who had done hard thinking for a long time. Because a letter isn't a life, he said. I didn't want to write to you about what I was building. I wanted to bring it to you finished. I wanted to walk in and say, here, this is done, this is real. You can see it and touch it, and decide with your eyes open, not based on promises written on paper. He paused. I know that was wrong. I know I made the choice for you that should have been yours to make. I'm not defending it. I'm just telling you why. Clara looked at the steps between her boots for a long time. You're going to have to do better than that, she said finally. But her voice had lost its edge. I know, he said. I'm planning on it. The reply from Shelby County arrived on Tuesday. Clara didn't know what it said, not at first. She heard it secondhand from Della Marsh, who'd heard it from her husband, who worked at the postal office and had seen the official envelope from Montana across the sheriff's desk. And then she heard it third-hand from young Pete Calloway, the same boy Ethan had helped find his missing calf, who'd overheard Marcus and his deputy talking low and urgent in the hallway outside the office. The deputy said something about a shooting. Pete told her, red-faced and uncertain, standing at the store counter with his hat in his hands. I wasn't trying to listen, but he said Ryder's name, and I heard shooting, and I thought you should know, Miss Vaughn. I don't know if it means anything. It felt like the cold thing in her stomach dropped through the floor. She thanked Pete. She waited until he was gone, and then she went to find Ethan. She found him at the Whitmore property, helping Cal replace a second section of fencing that had given way in the wind. He saw her face when she came through the gate and handed the post-hole digger to Cal without a word, and walked to meet her. There's something I need to ask you, she said, and I need you to answer me straight. Always, he said. Was there a shooting in Montana before you left? His face didn't change, not in the way she'd feared, not the flinch of a guilty man caught out. It changed in the way of someone who had expected this question, had known it was coming, and had decided what the answer was going to be. Yes, he said. The word sat between them. Tell me, she said. He looked at her steadily. 2 months before I left Shelby County, there was a man hired hand on the operation north of mine who had been stealing cattle. Not mine, a neighbor's. I saw it happen. I confronted him. He drew on me. A pause. He didn't finish the draw. Clara's heart was hammering. He's dead. He lived, Ethan said. Shoulder wound. He was arrested 3 days later when the county sheriff did an inquiry. There were 2 witnesses besides me. The inquiry closed with no charges. His voice was even measured the voice of a man telling a story he has told to himself many times and has made his own peace with. It's in the record, Clara. It's not hidden. I didn't run from it. I left Shelby County because I was done building and it was time to go. Those are two different things. She looked at him. She was looking for the thing Marcus had been looking for, the gap between the story and the truth, the place where the seams showed. She looked hard. She found nothing except a man who was tired of having his integrity questioned and was enduring it anyway because he understood why it was happening. Marcus is going to come to you, she said, with that letter. Let him come. You're not worried. I've got nothing to hide. He met her eyes. Are you worried? She should say no. She knew what the right answer was, the safe answer, the answer that kept all her walls where she'd built them. I don't know yet, she said instead. He nodded slowly. Like that was an answer he respected more than a comfortable lie. Marcus came to the boarding house that same evening. Clara wasn't there. She heard about it afterward from Harlan himself, who had been sitting on his own porch when the sheriff arrived, and who had the particular talent of old men for being invisibly present during significant events. Marcus had come with the letter. He'd put it on the porch railing in front of Ethan and told him what it said and asked him directly if there was anything he wanted to add. Ethan had said no. Everything in the letter was accurate. Marcus had asked about the shooting again in his own words, in his own order, and Ethan had answered the same way he'd answered Clara, steady, detailed, without defense or anger. Then Marcus had asked him something else. He asked him. Harlan told Clara the next morning over his own front gate, with the relish of a man who knows he has the centerpiece of the week's most important story, what his intentions were, toward you specifically. What did Ethan say? Clara asked, despite herself. Harlan's eyes crinkled at the corners. He said, I'm going to ask her to come home with me, to Montana, to the life I built. Just like that. Didn't apologize for it, didn't soften it. And Marcus? Oh, Marcus didn't like that one bit. Harlan shook his head slowly. He told Ryder that you were a grown woman who could make her own choices, but that if Ryder did anything to hurt you, there wouldn't be a county in the territory that would be far enough. He paused, and Ryder looked at him and said, I know, I'd expect nothing less. And that was that. Clara stood at the gate for a moment. Harlan, she said, does Ethan know you tell everyone everything? Harlan considered this with great seriousness. I imagine he suspects it, he said. He doesn't seem to be saying anything he wouldn't want repeated. She went to the oak tree that evening. She hadn't decided to meet him there. She'd just gone because it was where she went. He was there again. They sat in the same places they'd sat 3 days earlier, and the silence was different this time. Less guarded, less charged. More like the silence of two people who have gotten through the worst of an argument and are finding their way back to level ground. I heard what you said, she told him. To Marcus, about Montana. I figured you would. You didn't have to say it like that. That direct. How else would I say it? She was quiet for a moment. You're not going to change your mind, she said. It wasn't a question, not exactly. No, he said. I'm not. A pause. But I'm not going to push you, Clara. I already made the mistake of deciding things without asking you. I'm not going to do it again. He looked straight ahead the way he did when he was being most honest. I'll stay as long as you need. I'll answer whatever you want to know. And when you've made your decision, whatever it is, I'll respect it, even if it isn't the one I'm hoping for. She felt something shift again inside her. That lock, that rusted hinge. You're a hard man to stay angry at, she said. That's very inconvenient. He turned his head and looked at her, and for the first time since he'd walked through the door of her store, he almost smiled. It changed his whole face. It made him look for one instant like the boy she remembered. I'll try to be more aggravating, he said. Please do, she said. And they sat until dark, and neither of them moved to leave, and somewhere underneath the silence, Something that had been frozen for 20 years was beginning very slowly to thaw. She wasn't ready to call it hope yet. But she wasn't ready to call it nothing either. Something that had been frozen for 20 years was beginning to thaw, and that Clara was discovering was not entirely comfortable. Thawing hurt. That was the thing nobody told you. You spent years building cold into something solid and reliable, and then the warmth came back and everything that had been neatly preserved started to move again in ways you couldn't predict or control. She woke up Wednesday morning in a worse mood than she'd been in all week, which made no logical sense, and she burned her coffee, and she snapped at Martha Oakes over absolutely nothing when Martha came in to buy thread, and she apologized twice, and still felt the irritation sitting under her skin like a burr. She was 40 minutes into the morning when she admitted to herself what the problem was. She was starting to believe him. Not completely, not yet, but enough that the armor she'd been wearing since Monday was getting heavier rather than lighter, and a tired woman carrying heavy armor is a woman who is running out of reasons to keep wearing it. She hated that. Ethan showed up at the store at 10:30. He didn't come to see her, or at least he didn't present it that way. He came in with Cal Whitmore, who needed fencing wire and a new pair of work gloves, and was apparently incapable of navigating a general store without moral support. Ethan hung back near the door while Cal conducted his business, and if Clara noticed that Ethan's presence in the room made her more careful about every small thing she did, the way she wrote in the ledger, the way she counted back change. She wasn't prepared to admit that to anyone, including herself. Cal paid and picked up his bag and clapped Ethan on the shoulder on his way out and said, "I'll wait out front," in the cheerful tone of a man who has just realized he is not actually needed. Ethan looked at the closing door, then at Clara. "He's not subtle," Clara said. "No," Ethan agreed. "He's not." He moved to the counter, not all the way, not pressing, but closer. "How are you this morning?" "Busy," she said, though she wasn't particularly. "Right." He was quiet for a second. "I wanted to ask you something, and you can say no." She looked up. "There's a school meeting tonight," he said. "I heard from Della Marsh that you're presenting the reading program to the town council. I'd like to come." She stared at him. "You want to come to a school board meeting?" "It's important to you," he said simply. "The program. You've been working on it for 2 years, Della mentioned that. I'd like to see it." She should say no. She had 100 reasons to say no, practical reasons. Sensible reasons. Reasons that had nothing to do with the fact that the idea of him sitting in that meeting hall watching her work made her feel something warm and unsteady that she deeply distrusted. "It's a public meeting," she said instead. "Anyone can attend." Which was not a no. They both knew it. The school board met in the old meeting hall on Cedar Street, and that Wednesday evening, it was fuller than usual, whether because word had gotten around about the reading program, or because word had gotten around about who might be attending. Clara couldn't be certain and preferred not to investigate. She sat at the front table with Principal Eldon Gray and the 3 council members, and she presented her proposal the way she'd rehearsed it, clear, direct, backed by 2 years of observation about which children in Copper Ridge were falling behind, and why, and what a structured lending library and reading hour program would cost versus what it would return over 5 years in terms of student outcomes. She'd done the numbers. She knew the numbers. She was good at this. The council asked their questions. She answered them. Eldon Gray backed her up on the practical points. 2 of the 3 council members were clearly already persuaded. Councilman Briggs, red-faced, loud in the particular way of men who substitute volume for argument, was not. "It's a fine idea," Briggs said in the tone that means the opposite. "But we're talking about real money here, Miss Vaughn. Books cost money. The space costs money. Who's going to run this thing?" "I am," Clara said, "voluntarily after school hours." "And when you can't anymore? When you've got other obligations?" "Then we'll find someone else," she said. "The same way we do with every community institution. The library in Prescott started the same way 22 years ago, and it's still running." Briggs made a noise that suggested he found Prescott deeply unconvincing. From the third row, a voice said, "She's right about Prescott." Briggs looked up. The room looked up. Ethan Ryder was sitting in the third row with his hat in his hands and the specific calm of a man who has just decided to say something and has already accepted whatever happens next. "I came through Prescott 6 weeks ago," he said. "The library there runs a children's reading program. The woman who runs it told me they started with 40 books and a borrowed room. Now they've got 400 books and their own building, and 3 of the children from their first class are in the university at Tucson." He looked at Briggs with the steady gray eyes that didn't argue, just stated. "Miss Vaughn's asking for a starting budget. She's not asking for a monument. There's a difference." Briggs opened his mouth. Clara said carefully, "Thank you for that perspective." In a tone that meant both "you have made a good point, and please stop now," and Ethan caught it and sat back and said nothing further. The vote was 2-1 in favor. Briggs voted no, because Briggs always voted no on things that required spending any money on children, and would until the day he retired, and everyone in Copper Ridge had made their peace with that long ago. She found Ethan on the steps afterward. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Briggs was being unreasonable. "He's always unreasonable. It's practically his whole personality." She crossed her arms, but there was no real heat in it. "I had it handled." "I know you did." He looked at her straight. "I just didn't like watching him dismiss you." That sat between them for a moment. "You went through Prescott," she said. 6 weeks ago. That's when you would have been on the road south," he said. "Yes." She thought about the town called Delano, the 20 minutes on horseback in the middle of a street, deciding whether to keep going. She thought about a man who noticed a children's library in a passing town and stored the fact away because it was the kind of thing she would care about. "That was the town," she said, "the one that looked like Copper Ridge." "No," he said. "That was Delano. Prescott is further south." A pause. "I nearly stopped in Prescott too." "How many times did you almost turn back?" He thought about it. Honest, not performing honesty, actually thinking. 4, he said. Delano Prescott, a town in New Mexico called Cimarron, and the last water stop before the Arizona border. He looked at her. 4 times I thought about turning around. 4 times I didn't. A beat. I'm not telling you that to make you feel obligated. I'm telling you because you asked me to tell you things I didn't plan. She uncrossed her arms. The program starts in September, she said, because she needed to say something that wasn't about what she was actually feeling. If the council finds the budget by July. They will, he said, Briggs or no Briggs. She almost smiled. How are you so certain? Because you decided it would happen, he said. I've known you for 30 years, Clara, even counting the ones I wasn't here for. When you decide something is going to happen, it happens. He said it simply, the way you state something that is just factually true. She didn't know what to do with that. So she said goodnight and walked home and spent the better part of an hour standing at her kitchen window, not doing anything in particular. The next morning, Marcus Hale was waiting when she opened the store. He was sitting on the bench outside, not blocking the door, not making a scene, just sitting with his coffee cup and his steady pale eyes, and the particular patience of a man who has decided to do something he knows might not go well. I owe you an apology, he said when she stopped in front of him. She looked at him. For what specifically? For going around you, writing to Shelby County before I'd said a word to you or to him. He turned the cup in his hands. That wasn't protecting you. You were right about that. It was something else. She sat down on the other end of the bench. I spoke to him, Marcus said. Properly, yesterday afternoon. We talked for a while. A pause. He's not what I was hoping to find. What were you hoping to find? He was quiet for a moment. Something I could warn you away from. He said it without inflection, just honestly, and it landed with the weight of a real confession. The history from Montana is clean, Clara. No charges, no disputes, no record worth mentioning. He's got a good name up there, People know him as someone who works hard and pays fair and keeps his word. He set the coffee cup on the bench beside him. Which is, he stopped. Not the answer you wanted, Clara said. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her, and for once the professional stillness dropped, and she saw underneath it what had been underneath it for 5 years. Something genuine and careful, and quietly hopeful, that she had never properly faced. I'm not a fool, Clara. I can see what's happening. She opened her mouth. Let me finish, he said, not sharply. I've been patient for a long time. I think you know that. And I know I never pushed, never made my intentions clear enough for it to mean anything. And that's on me. I'm not blaming you for not responding to something I never said directly. He picked up his cup again. I'm saying it now, I suppose. Not to pressure you. Not to compete. Just because it seemed wrong to have you not know. A pause. I care about you. I have for a long time. And I think if this man had never come back, we might have eventually... He stopped again. But he did come back. Clara sat very still. Marcus, she said carefully. You don't have to say anything, he said. I mean that. I needed you to know. And then I needed to stop standing between you and whatever you're going to decide. He stood up, straightened his coat. For what it's worth, I think he means what he says. I think he actually built what he says he built, and came back for the reason he says he came back. He looked down at her. That doesn't make your decision easier. I know that. I'm sorry for that. He walked down the street. Clara sat on the bench alone for a long time, holding her keys, the store door still locked behind her. She had spent 20 years building a life defined by what she didn't have. She'd done it gracefully, done it without complaint, done it with enough genuine satisfaction in the small daily shape of things that she'd almost convinced herself it was enough. Marcus had been part of that, almost the comfortable, almost the safe almost. She had cared about him in the way you care about the furniture of your daily life genuinely, without passion, with the particular tenderness of things you've grown used to. And now she was sitting on a bench in the morning sun, and she was thinking about a man who had driven south through 4 towns, where he almost turned back and hadn't, and she felt something she hadn't felt since she was 10 years old, and the whole future was still unwritten. She felt the terrifying, exhilarating, completely irresponsible pull of wanting. She told herself she was going to the boarding house to return his copy of the deed, which she had been holding on to in her kitchen drawer, and which there was no legitimate reason to keep. That was what she told herself. She found him not at the boarding house, but at the schoolhouse, because somehow she was not entirely surprised by this, because he had apparently made it his project over the past 2 days to repair the broken window latch on the east wall and the loose floorboard in the reading corner that had been catching children's feet for 3 years. He was on his knees with a hammer when she appeared in the doorway, and he looked up without startlement, like he'd known she was coming. I have your deed, she said, holding it out. He got to his feet and crossed the room and took it, but he didn't step back. You also have something on your mind, he said. Marcus talked to me this morning. I know. I saw him leave the store. His voice was carefully neutral. What did he say? He said you were clean. No trouble in Montana, no record. A pause. He also said he told me something personal. About himself. About how he felt. She watched Ethan's face. I thought you should know. Something moved in Ethan's expression. Not triumph she had braced for, that for some flicker of satisfaction. And it wasn't there. What was there was something more complicated, more respectful. He's a good man, Ethan said. He is, she said. And before you came back, I didn't know what I felt about him. Or maybe I knew, and I just didn't look at it too directly. She met his eyes. I know now. Ethan was very still. I'm not saying yes, she said quickly, clearly. I want you to understand that. I am not standing here saying yes to Montana or to the ranch or to... I am not ready for that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that. I know, he said. But I'm also... She stopped, started again. I stopped waiting for you a long time ago. I convinced myself I was done. And I was, I think. I genuinely was. She looked at him. And then you walked through that door, and within a week, I'm sitting on benches trying to figure out what I want, which is something I stopped doing a long time ago, because it hurt too much. Her voice went quiet on the last part. I hate that it's you, she said. I want you to know that. I really, really hate that it's you. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. And then softer. I'm sorry, Clara. You better be, she said. And then she did something she hadn't planned. She stepped forward, and she put her hand against his chest. Not reaching, just resting palm flat over his heartbeat, and she felt it there solid and real, and she stood like that for 3 seconds that lasted considerably longer than 3 seconds. Then she stepped back. Fix the floorboard, she said, because she needed to say something ordinary. The children have been tripping on it since November. Yes, ma'am, he said. She left. She walked back down Cedar Street with her hands at her sides and her heart doing something complicated in her chest, and she thought that whatever came next, whatever she decided, whatever she chose, it was going to be the most important decision she'd ever made. And for the first time in 20 years, that didn't feel only like a threat. So, she was 3 blocks from home when she heard the first rider come in from the South Road at a full gallop. She turned and looked. It was Jim Peel, one of the ranchers from the edge of town, and he was riding harder than any good news ever required. He pulled up at the sheriff's office. She heard him shouting before he was fully off the horse. She couldn't make out the words from where she stood, but the sound of them, the pitch, the urgency put the cold thing back in her stomach with a force that had nothing to do with Ethan Ryder or Marcus Hale or childhood promises. She started walking toward the sheriff's office. By the time she got there, Marcus was already outside, hat on hand on his sidearm, his deputy beside him, and his face gone to the particular hard flatness that Clara had only seen on it once before 2 years ago, when the trouble out at the Delacroix ranch had gotten bad. "What is it?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. Then he looked at Jim Peel, still breathing hard from the ride, his horse blowing and stamping behind him. "Riders," Jim said. "Coming up from the South Pass, 6 of them, maybe 7, armed and moving fast." He looked at Marcus. "I recognize the brand on 2 of the horses, Sheriff. It's the Crane outfit." The words fell into the afternoon like stones into deep water. Clara knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. The Crane outfit, what was left of it, had been working the southern counties for 2 years, hitting remote ranches and small towns, taking what they could carry, and leaving damage that took months to repair. Marcus said very quietly to his deputy, "Get the men together." And then he looked at Clara with something in his eyes that was not quite fear, but was the thing next to it. The thing that comes before fear, when a man who knows what's coming has a few minutes to prepare himself for it. "Go home, Clara," he said. "Lock the doors." She didn't go home. She turned around and ran to the schoolhouse on Cedar Street. She ran the whole way. Not because she had a plan. She didn't have a plan. Not yet, but because the alternative was standing still, while Copper Ridge braced for something ugly, and standing still had never been something Clara Vaughn was built for. She pushed through the schoolhouse door, and Ethan was already on his feet, hammered down, reading her face before she'd said a single word. "How many?" he said. She stopped. "How did you—" "I heard Peel's horse coming in from 3 blocks away." He moved to the window, not looking out so much as listening, his whole body gone to that particular stillness she'd come to recognize, not calm exactly, but contained. "How many riders?" 6, maybe 7. The Crane outfit. She watched his jaw tighten. "You know the name?" "Everyone south of Denver knows the name." He turned from the window. "Where's Marcus?" "Pulling men together. He told me to go home." He was right. "Ethan?" "Clara." His voice was direct and quiet and left no room for argument. "Where is your father right now?" She felt the question land in her chest like a cold hand. "The store. He was going to stay until closing. He had inventory to—" "The store is on Main Street," Ethan said, moving past her toward the door. "If they're coming in from the South Pass, Main Street is exactly where they'll come through." He stopped in the doorway and looked at her. "Go get your father. Take him to the Whitmore house. It's set back from the road stone walls. Stay there." A pause. "Please." She looked at him, at the gray eyes that had gone focused and serious in the way of a man who has seen this kind of thing before and is already 3 steps ahead of it. She thought about the shooting in Montana, the inquiry that closed with no charges, 2 witnesses. She thought about the scar on his jaw. "Be careful," she said. "Always." He held her eyes for 1 second. "Go." She went. She hit the door of Vaughn's General Store at a dead run and found her father exactly where she'd feared, behind the counter reading glasses on, going through the inventory ledger with the unhurried concentration of a man who did not yet know that anything was wrong. "Papa!" She was breathing hard. "We have to go. Right now." He looked up, took one look at her face, put down the pencil. How bad? The Crane outfit, coming up from the South Pass. He said one short, unprintable word that she'd never heard him say in 30 years, which told her he understood exactly how bad, and reached under the counter for the shotgun he kept there and had never in her memory actually used. "Papa, no. This is my store, Clara." "It is, and it'll still be your store after this is over if you come with me right now. It won't matter whose store it is if you're in the middle of Main Street when 7 armed men ride through." She came around the counter and put her hand on his arm. "Please. Ethan said of the Whitmore house. Stone walls." He looked at her. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at the store around him, the shelves he'd built, the floor he'd laid, 30 years of daily life, stacked up in canned goods and fencing wire. "All right," he said. He handed her the shotgun. "You carry that. My hip won't let me move fast enough with it." They moved. Main Street was not yet chaos, but it was the thing right before chaos, that particular human frequency of a community realizing simultaneously that something was wrong and not yet knowing which direction to run. Clara could hear Marcus's voice somewhere behind her, organizing, directing the deputies' whistle sharp over the general noise. She kept her father moving, one hand on his arm, the shotgun in her other hand, and she didn't look back. They were half a block from the Whitmore property when the first shot rang out from the south end of town. Not close. Not yet. But close enough. Her father stumbled. Not hit, just startled, his bad hip giving on the uneven ground, and she caught him, and for 10 terrible seconds they were standing in the open. He couldn't get his footing, and she couldn't move him fast enough. And she could hear the horses' now hoofbeats like a drumline. And she thought with a clarity that fear sometimes produces, "We're not going to make it." And then Ethan was there. She didn't see where he came from. One moment it was just her and her father and the sound of hoofbeats, and the next Ethan had her father's other arm across his shoulders, and they were moving fast, faster than she'd managed alone, and Cal Whitmore had the gate open and they were through it and behind the stone wall before she'd processed what had happened. "I told you to go straight here," Ethan said, breathing hard. "He had a shotgun," Clara said. "Of course he did." Ethan looked at her father. "You all right, sir?" Robert Vaughn straightened himself with considerable dignity for a man who'd just been half carried across a yard. "I'm fine," he said. "Don't fuss." A pause. "Thank you, son." It was the word son that did it. She saw it land on Ethan, saw him absorb it, steady himself against it, and for one unguarded moment, his face showed something that had nothing to do with the gunfire coming from 2 streets over. Then he turned back to the wall. "Stay down," he said. "Both of you." What happened next, Clara pieced together partly from what she heard through the Whitmore's stone wall, and partly from what she was told afterward by the people who had been in the middle of it. The Crane outfit, 7 riders. As it turned out, the 7th, having been obscured by the dust of the others on Jim Peel's approach, had come in fast and hard through the south end of Main Street, the way that kind of outfit always did, counting on speed and noise to scatter people before any organized resistance could form. What they had not counted on was that Marcus Hale had had 12 minutes of warning and had used every one of them. He had 4 men with rifles positioned in the upper windows of the feed store and the hotel on opposite sides of Main Street. He had his deputy and 2 more armed men at the north end of the street cutting off the exit route. He had stationed himself at the south end in the open, which was either brave or foolish, or both, and had held up his hand when the riders came within shouting distance and said in the carrying voice he used when he didn't intend to say anything twice, "You are riding into a contained street. You will drop your weapons or you will not leave it." 2 of the 7 stopped. The other 5 didn't. The next 4 minutes were very loud. Clara crouched behind the Whitmore's stone wall and listened to it and concentrated on breathing steady, on keeping her hand on her father's arm, on not thinking about what was happening on the other side of that wall. The shotgun was heavy in her hands. She had never fired it. She hoped she wouldn't need to. She almost needed to. One of the riders, she learned later, it was a man named Cord Ferris, the youngest of the Crane outfit and the most reckless, had broken east off Main Street and come up behind the Whitmore property on foot, having abandoned his horse somewhere in the confusion. He was coming over the back fence when Clara heard him spun and raised the shotgun before she'd made any conscious decision to do so. He froze. She froze. They looked at each other across 15 feet of Whitmore Yard. "Put it down," she said. Her voice did not shake. She was distantly proud of that. He was young, 20 maybe, with frightened eyes above the bravado, and he looked at the shotgun, and he looked at her face, and he made the calculation that people make when they can tell that the other person means it. He put it down. He put both hands up. "Kick it toward me," she said. He did. "Now sit down," she said. "Right there on the ground, and don't move." He sat. She kept the shotgun on him until Marcus's deputy came around the side of the property 11 minutes later and found her standing over a sitting prisoner with an expression that the deputy described afterward to everyone who would listen as the calmest he had ever seen on a person in a crisis bar. None. No, it was over in under 20 minutes. 5 of the 7 riders were taken. 1 had turned and run south at the first sign of organized resistance and made it out of the kill zone Marcus had constructed before the trap closed. 1, the deputy told her this quietly, apart from the others, had not. The fight had gone badly for him in the first exchange of fire at the south end of Main Street. 3 townspeople wounded, none critically. Marcus had a graze on his forearm that he was refusing to acknowledge. 2 horses were running loose somewhere east of town. And Robert Vaughn had a bruised hip from the scramble across the yard, which he was also refusing to acknowledge, which apparently ran in the family. Clara found Ethan at the south end of Main Street. He had a cut above his eyebrow, something from the chaos, a piece of flying wood or stone, she couldn't tell, and his shirt was torn at the shoulder, and he was talking to Marcus in the low, direct tones of 2 men exchanging information, and he looked up when she came toward him, and the relief that crossed his face was so immediate and unguarded that it stopped her mid-stride. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing." He reached up and touched the cut, seemed genuinely to have forgotten it was there. Is your father?" "He's fine. We're both fine. I had a man come over the Whitmore back fence." Both men looked at her. "I held him with the shotgun until the deputy came," she said. "He's in custody." Marcus stared at her for a moment, with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he said, "Of course you did," in a tone that had several things layered inside it. Ethan said nothing, but the way he looked at her, steady and certain, and something else she was not ready to name, said enough. The town came back to itself, the way towns do after something like that, slowly, noisily. everyone needing to tell their version of it to everyone else, until the collective story had been told enough times to become something the community owned, rather than something that had happened to them. Copper Ridge had come through it, and coming through something together does what it always does. It pulls people tighter, sharpens the lines of who belongs and who has shown themselves in the hour it counted. Ethan Ryder had shown himself. That was the fact that moved through Copper Ridge over the following hours. Not loudly, not with speeches or ceremony, but in the way that small towns process important things in doorway conversations and countertop exchanges, in the particular nods of men who respect action over explanation. He had helped get Robert Vaughn clear. He had been at the south end of Main Street when the Riders came through fighting beside men he'd known less than 2 weeks. He had done both of these things without being asked, without hesitation, without afterward saying a single word about it. He stood his ground. Cal Whitmore told anyone who would listen. Right there next to Marcus, didn't flinch. Marcus, for his own part, said nothing about Ethan one way or the other, which in the language of Marcus Hale was its own kind of statement. She found Ethan at the boarding house that evening. He was on the porch, the cut above his eyebrow cleaned and closed, and he was looking at his hands in the particular way of a man sitting with something heavy. She sat beside him without asking, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "The man who didn't make it," she said. "Does it weigh on you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "It always does." He looked at his hands. "I've never found a way to make it not weigh. I'm not sure I'd trust a man who could." "Marcus said you were at the south end of the street, in the open." "Marcus needed another gun." "That's not a complete answer." He looked up. "Your father was 2 streets over." He said it simply without drama. "Everything valuable to me in the world was 2 streets over. You want to know why I was at the south end of the street? That's why. Everything valuable to me in the world." The words moved through her like water through dry ground, finding every crack. "Ethan," she said. "I know," he said quietly. "I know, Clara." "No, you don't." She turned on the bench to face him directly. "I have been careful my whole life. I have been so careful. I built everything around being careful, around not wanting too much, around not—" She stopped, found her words. "And then you came back. And I told myself I was angry, and I was. And I told myself I didn't trust you, and I wasn't sure. And I told myself it was too late, and too much time had passed, and a person can't just—" She stopped again. "And then today happened. And you were there, Ethan, when it mattered. You were there." He was looking at her with the complete attention of a man who is afraid to move in case the moment breaks. "I kept telling myself a man who disappeared for 20 years isn't someone to trust," she said. "And you know what's been making me furious all week, that I can't make that argument work anymore. I keep making it, and it keeps falling down because every time I try to hold it up, you do something that knocks it over." Her voice went quiet. "I hate that. I genuinely hate that." "I know," he said. And this time he meant it differently. She looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, and the fresh cut above his eye, and the tiredness in his face, and the steadiness underneath the tiredness that had always been there even when he was 15 and she was 10, and the whole world was still simple. "The ranch," she said. "Tell me about it. Really. Not the deed, not the acreage. Tell me what it's actually like." Something in his face shifted, softened. He leaned back and looked up, and for the first time since he'd walked through her door, he didn't look like a man delivering a prepared case. He looked like a man talking about home. "Cold in winter," he said. "Colder than anything you've ever felt coming from Arizona. The kind of cold that teaches you humility." A pause. "There's a ridge to the east that catches the morning light in spring, when the grass comes in. It's the greenest thing you've ever seen. The house is good, solid. I built it to last, not to impress anyone. 2 fireplaces, big kitchen, a porch that runs the whole front length." He paused. "There's a room I framed out and never finished. I didn't know what it should be." She was very still. "Why not?" Because that decision didn't belong to me alone, he said. He looked at her sideways. It still doesn't. The porch was quiet around them. The town had settled into its nighttime sounds, a dog wind, the creak of cooling wood, and somewhere down the street someone was laughing, the release laugh of people who had been afraid and were now safe, and Clara listened to all of it, and felt something in her chest that had been clenched for 20 years, opening up slowly, like a hand that has been holding something tight for so long, it's forgotten how. The winters, she said. What do you do? Read, he said. Maintain. Plan the spring work. A small pause. It gets quiet. Long quiet. He looked at her. Too quiet most of the time. I like quiet, she said. I know you do. A beat. There's a school in Shelby, small. They've been looking for someone to run a reading program for 3 years. She turned and looked at him. He was not quite smiling, but close. That's not why I chose Montana, he said, but I won't pretend I didn't notice. She shook her head slowly, but the thing in her chest was fully open now, and there was no shutting it again, and she had stopped wanting to. They sat on that porch for 2 hours. They talked the way they hadn't talked since they were children, without performance, without caution, without the careful management of impression. He told her about the years in between, the real years, the ones that hadn't made it into the deed, or the careful speeches at her counter. The first winter in Montana, when the cattle operation nearly failed, and he'd worked 60 straight hours in the cold, keeping animals alive on willpower and anger alone. The year he'd been sick for 3 weeks, with nothing but his own stubbornness to manage on. The evening he'd stood on the ridge east of his property and watched the sun go down, and thought for the first time clearly, without doubt, this is the place. This is the thing I was building toward. Now go get her. She told him things she hadn't told anyone. About the year after he left when she was 11 and still watching the road for him. About the way she'd quietly stopped watching the decision of it, the small deliberate grief of it. About building the store work into a shape that was satisfying on its own terms, because the alternative was waiting for a life that might not come. About the reading program and what it meant to her, not just as education, but as evidence that she could make something from nothing, with nothing but her own belief in it. You did that, he said. You built all of that. I had to do something, she said. You didn't just do something, he said. You built a real thing. The store runs because of you. Those children read better because of you. He looked at her. You're going to run that program in September, whether you come to Montana or whether you stay. And if you come to Montana, you'll run the Shelby one too. He paused. I want to be clear about something. I'm not asking you to give up what you've built here. I'm asking you to add to it. She looked at him for a long time. I need to think, she said. I know. I need more time. I know that too. He met her eyes. I've got time, Clara. I've been patient for 20 years. I can be patient a little longer. She stood up from the porch. She was tired, bone-tired. The way you get after a day that has held too many things, and she needed sleep, and she needed quiet, and she needed the space inside her own head to do the thinking she was not yet ready to put words to. She took 2 steps off the porch and stopped. The room, she said without turning around. The one you didn't finish. Yes. It should have good light, she said. South-facing window if the layout allows. For reading. She paused. Just something to consider. She heard him go completely still behind her. She walked home. She didn't look back, but she was smiling by the time she reached her own door, and it was not a careful smile or a cautious smile, or a smile held together with willpower. It was the smile of a woman who has just let herself want something fully for the first time in 20 years. And it felt to her great surprise and enormous relief, exactly like coming up for air. She slept better that night than she had in a week. That fact alone told her something she hadn't been willing to say out loud. A person doesn't sleep like that deeply, dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who has set down a weight they've been carrying too long, unless something inside them has already made a decision that the conscious mind is still catching up to. She woke with the sun fully up, which almost never happened, and she lay there for a moment in the unfamiliar quiet of an overslept morning, and she took stock of herself, the way you take stock of a thing you're about to put to use. Her heart was steady. That surprised her. She had expected after the previous night to wake up frightened, to find that the openness she'd felt on Ethan's porch had closed back up in the night, the way a wound sometimes does the body's reflex toward self-protection, overriding everything else. She'd expected doubt to have moved back in while she slept, to find the careful walls reinstated, the arguments reassembled, the 20 years of learned self-sufficiency back in position. Instead, she found clarity. It was not a comfortable feeling. Clarity rarely is. It demands something of you. It removes the protection of ambiguity, strips away the excuse of not quite knowing, and leaves you standing in front of what you actually believe with nothing to hide behind. She got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and let herself feel the full weight of what she was about to do. Then she went to find her father. Robert Vaughn was at the kitchen table when she arrived, his bad hip propped on a footstool, the morning paper folded in his lap, and a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He looked up when she came in and read her face, the way he always had, the particular fluency of a parent who has been paying close attention for 30 years. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He waited. "I'm thinking of going to Montana," she said, "with Ethan, to see the ranch, to see what he built." She paused. Just to see. Not a final decision, but a real one. Her father was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee, found it cold, set it down again. "When?" "I don't know yet. A few weeks, after the council meeting about the reading program budget. After I've made sure the store arrangements are in order." "I can run the store," he said with mild offense. "I ran it for 30 years before you took over." "You can run it with Della Marsh helping 3 days a week," she said. "And Cal Whitmore has already offered to check in on you. Don't give me that look." "It wasn't my idea," Ethan asked him. Something crossed her father's face at that. A complicated something in the neighborhood of approval and grief, and the particular bittersweet feeling of watching a child move toward a future that doesn't include your daily life in quite the same way. "He thought ahead," Robert said. "He thinks ahead," Clara said. "That's one of the things I've been noticing." Her father nodded slowly, looking at his hands. "Your mother would have liked him," he said. It came out quietly, almost to himself. "She always said the men worth keeping are the ones who do things without being asked, and then don't mention it." Clara felt something press at the back of her eyes. "I know," she said. "Go," her father said. Simply, firmly, the way he made important statements. "Go see the ranch. See what he built." He looked up. "And if it's what he says it is, don't you dare let pride or stubbornness talk you out of happiness. You've been careful long enough, Clara. Your mother and I didn't raise you to be careful. We raised you to be brave." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held it. They sat like that for a while, not saying anything, because some things don't need words. And between a father and a daughter who have been each other's steadiest company for 30 years, the silences hold as much meaning as the speech. Ahmed. She went to Marcus next. She found him at the office, his arm bandaged properly. Now the graze from the previous day's fight dressed with the reluctant compliance of a man who'd rather have ignored it. He was at his desk when she came in, and he looked up, and she could tell from his face that he already knew not the specifics, but the shape of it. Some things read clearly. "I'm going to Montana," she said, "to see the ranch." "I know," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you came to tell me yourself, which means you've made up your mind about more than just the visit." He held her eyes without flinching. "How long?" "A few weeks for the trip. After that?" She stopped. "I don't know yet. I genuinely don't." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, doing the same work she'd watched him do since she'd known him, containing what he felt, managing it into something functional, presenting only what was useful. It was one of the things she'd always respected about him, and this morning it made her heart ache. "Marcus," she said. "Don't," he said, not sharply, gently. "Don't apologize for something that was never yours to apologize for." He straightened some papers on his desk. "I told you last time that I wasn't going to stand between you and your decision. I meant that." A pause. "He's a good man. I didn't want him to be, but he is." "You're a good man too," she said. "That has always been true, and it's going to keep being true." He looked at her for a long moment. "Go," he said, "before I say something that makes this harder than it needs to be." She stood up. At the door she stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, for protecting this town yesterday, for being honest with me, for—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Go on, Clara," he said. His voice was even. His hands were flat on the desk, very still. She went. She found Ethan at the boarding house, and she was going to say it simply. She had planned it, had the words arranged, a clean and direct statement that was neither too much nor too little. But the moment she came through the gate, and he stood up from the porch steps and looked at her, all the arranged words left her entirely. "I'm going with you," she said, "to see the ranch, to see what you built." He didn't move, just looked at her with those gray eyes, steady and careful, like a man who doesn't trust good news until it repeats itself. "Just to see," she said. "I'm not saying—" "I know," he said. "Just to see is enough. It's not a yes to everything, Ethan. It's a yes to this, to seeing what's real." "Clara." His voice was very quiet. "A week ago you were holding the counter to stay upright when you saw me. Just to see is more than enough." He looked at her, and the thing she'd glimpsed on his porch the night before was fully visible, now not triumph, not relief even, but something more fundamental than either. The expression of a man who has carried something a very long way and can finally for the first time put it down. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've cooked me dinner twice in Montana, and then we'll see if gratitude is the right word." He almost laughed. A real laugh, quiet and surprised. It changed his face the same way the almost smile had the day before, opened it up, let the 15-year-old boy show through for a moment, and she filed that away somewhere she intended to keep it. "I can cook," he said. "You better be able to," she said. "I'm not going all the way to Montana to eat badly." She spent the following 2 weeks putting her affairs in order, with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to everything. The store arrangements Della Marsh for 3 mornings. Tom Reeves agreeing to handle deliveries, her father managing the rest, with the recovered authority of a man who has been waiting for someone to let him be useful again. The reading program documents prepared and submitted to the council with a detailed handover guide in case the approval came while she was away. Letters written to the 2 families whose children she tutored after school with arrangements for continuity. She was not running away. She was stepping toward something. There was a difference, and she felt it in how she packed, not frantically, not urgently, but with care, choosing what to bring. The way you choose what to bring when you expect to need it for a long time. The night before they were to leave, Martha Oakes came to the house and sat in the kitchen for 2 hours, and said nothing particularly useful and everything necessary, which is what old friends are for. "You're scared," Martha said. "Completely," Clara said. "Good." Martha topped off her own tea. "Scared means it matters. Scared means you're paying attention." She looked at Clara over the rim. "You were never scared of any of the small things. You were always only scared of the real ones." "That's not comforting, Martha. It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be true." Martha put her cup down. "Go. See the ranch. See the man on his own ground in his own life. That's the only way to know." She paused. "And if it's what you think it is, Don't waste any more time being careful. Clara looked at her. You sound like my father. Your father is a very wise man, Martha said. It's one of the things I've always liked about him, and... Oh. The morning they left, half of Copper Ridge turned out. Not dramatically, not a formal send-off, not ceremony. Just people finding reasons to be on or near Main Street at 7 in the morning. People who had business at the store and the diner and the hardware shop and happened to be there at the same time that Clara Vaughn and Ethan Ryder walked out to the wagon with their bags. Cal Whitmore shook Ethan's hand and didn't let go for a moment. Della Marsh hugged Clara hard enough to knock the breath out of her. Young Pete Calloway stood at the edge of things with his hat in his hands, looking like a person who has not yet learned to disguise what he feels, which in this case was something close to reverence. And Robert Vaughn stood at the front of the store and looked at his daughter. And when she came to him, he held her for a long moment, the way fathers hold daughters when they are letting go of something and holding on at the same time. Right, he said. Every week, she said. And bring him back here eventually. I've got more questions. She laughed against his shoulder. He patted her back once, twice the way he'd done since she was small and stepped back. She turned and found Ethan waiting at a respectful distance, giving her the moment. And she thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that a man who knows when to give space is a man worth paying attention to. She walked to him. They left Copper Ridge on a Tuesday morning in late April, with the desert air still cool and the light coming in long and gold from the east, and she looked back once at the store at her father, still standing in front of it, at Martha Oakes and Della Marsh and Pete Calloway, and the particular skyline of the place she had lived her whole life, and she turned forward. Montana was a long way north. She was ready to see it. The ranch was real. That sounds like a simple thing, but it was the first thing she registered when they came through the final stretch of road and the property revealed itself. It was exactly what he'd said. It was in every dimension. Not smaller than described, not disappointingly ordinary up close, not the inflated version of itself that a man might build in his own telling. 42 acres of good land rolling toward the eastern ridge with the green of early spring thick on the grass, and the house solid and square at the center of it. 2 stories stone foundation, the long front porch he'd described running the full width. She stood in the yard and looked at it. You built this, she said. It came out differently than she intended, not a question, not an accusation, but the statement of someone reckoning with a fact that is larger than they expected. Every nail, he said. Took 11 years to get the house where it is. First 6 years I was in the original bunkhouse that came with the land. He was watching her face, not the house. The kitchen has a wood stove and a cast iron range. Both the range was the last thing I installed 2 winters ago. Show me the room, she said. He looked at her. Which room? She looked at him back. You know which room. He did. He took her inside and up the stairs and down the hall to the end, and he opened a door on a room that was framed and floored and plastered but otherwise empty. A raw space full of possibility, with a window on the south wall that pulled in the full afternoon light in a warm, generous rectangle that fell across the floor like something waiting to be used. She stood in the doorway. She thought about the school in Shelby, the 3-year vacancy in the reading program, the south-facing window, the unfinished room. She thought about a 15-year-old boy on a wagon saying, "I'll come back for you," and the 20 years in between, and the man standing beside her now, who had carried that promise through hard winters, and 4 almost turnarounds, and a shooting inquiry in Montana, and 7 armed riders in Copper Ridge, Arizona, and had still shown up. She thought about her father saying, "You were raised to be brave." She thought about Martha Oakes saying, "Don't waste any more time being careful." She thought about standing in the schoolhouse with her palm against Ethan's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and real. Bookshelves on the east wall, she said. Floor to ceiling. And a reading table in the center, good solid wood room for 6 children at once. She heard him exhale beside her, slow and long like a man releasing a breath he's been holding for a very long time. "I can build that," he said. She turned and looked at him. Standing in the doorway of the unfinished room in the house he had built for her on the land he had worked for 20 years, in the cold Montana light of a spring afternoon, with everything still and possible around them. "Yes," she said. One word. He looked at her. She held his gaze. "Not just the bookshelves," she said. "Yes to the room. Yes to the ranch. Yes to Montana." A pause. "Yes to you. The man you are now, not the boy you were. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying yes to a promise made when I was 10 years old. I'm saying yes to what you've shown me you are." Her voice was steady, certain. "That's a different thing. And it matters that it's different." He stepped toward her, stopped a foot away, close enough that she could see every line that 20 years of Montana winters and honest work had carved into his face, and every one of them looked to her like something earned rather than something lost. "Clara," he said. "Don't make a speech," she said. "You'll ruin it." He almost smiled, and then she closed the distance herself, and the almost smile became something she felt rather than saw, and the unfinished room held them both for a long moment in the south-facing afternoon light. She wrote to her father that same week. The letter was 3 pages. She told him about the ranch in the specific practical detail. She knew he would want the land, the cattle, the house, the kitchen with its cast-iron range. She told him about the ridge to the east and the green of the spring grass and the silence of the Montana mornings. That was a different quality of silence than the desert silence she'd grown up with, deeper and cooler, the silence of a place with more weather in it. She told him about the school in Shelby and the meeting she'd had with the schoolmaster there and the fact that the reading program position was hers if she wanted it, and that she wanted it. She told him she was staying. On the last page she wrote, "You said I was raised to be brave. I think I finally understood what that meant. Not fearless. I'm not fearless, Papa. I'm terrified and certain at the same time, which I think might be what brave actually is." Her father wrote back in 9 days, which was faster than she'd expected. The letter was 1 page. It said, among other things, "Your mother would be furious that it took you this long and delighted that you got there in the end. I am both of those things as well." At the bottom, in the smaller, careful handwriting he reserved for important things. "Come home for Christmas. Bring him." "I have more questions." She laughed until she cried sitting at the kitchen table of the house he'd built, and Ethan came in from outside and looked at her, and she handed him the letter and watched him read it. He read it twice. "More questions," he said. "He liked you," she said. "This is what it looks like when he likes you." "God help me if he didn't," Ethan said. She laughed again, and he sat across from her at the table, and they were quiet together, in the particular easy way of 2 people who have stopped needing to perform anything for each other. The silence comfortable and full, and theirs. The porch faced west. She discovered this on the 3rd evening when she took her coffee outside and found the sky going to copper and rose over the distant hills, the same colors as the desert she'd grown up in, transplanted north. And something about that felt like a message she hadn't ordered but was glad to receive. Ethan came out and sat beside her, and they watched it together without talking. The way people watch sunsets with the particular quality of attention you give to beautiful things that you know are going to end and want to hold a little longer. "You were late," she said. He turned and looked at her. 20 years late," she said. "I want the record to show that." He held her gaze, and then the corner of his mouth moved, and the quiet laugh came again, the one that showed the boy underneath. "Yeah," he said. "I was. Just so we're clear." "Crystal clear," he said. She looked back at the sunset. He stayed where he was, close enough that their shoulders touched. And on a porch in Shelby County, Montana, in the last light of an April evening, Clara Vaughn, who had spent 20 years building a careful life out of letting go, found that she had arrived finally and completely and without reservation exactly where she was always meant to be. Some promises take 20 years to keep, but the ones that survive that long, tested by distance and silence and doubt and time, carried through hard winters and near turnarounds, and the 1,000 small decisions that make up a life, those promises don't just get kept. They become something better than they were when they were made. They become a life. And that was exactly what Ethan Ryder and Clara Vaughn built on 42 acres of good Montana land in the house, with the unfinished room that finally, at last, had its purpose. A room full of bookshelves and good light and the sound of children's voices. A room that had been waiting for the right person to walk through the door and fill it. She did. And it was in every way that mattered exactly enough.